My natural state is to be in my office writing. I think a lot of writers would say that they're introverts. All my books are set in landmark buildings. And I love all these layers of stories that are in these buildings over the years. So what was it like in the 1880s? And then what was it like in the 1980s? And just comparing and contrasting how especially women who lived in the buildings existed and what kind of power did they have? What was their life like? That's when the story really sings, because these women start to come alive and come off the page and really become emblems of their time.
Hi, I'm Demetra Ganias, and I am so honored to join Fairfield County Look in its Look Literary Series. We're excited today to chat with Fiona Davis, the author of The Lions of Fifth Avenue. It is her fifth masterpiece. Fiona, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about this exciting time that we're living in when we're doing an interview like this instead of a book tour. How are things going for you?
Yeah, everything's gone virtual. And it's interesting because the publishing world has really pivoted quite quickly to it. So instead of going out on author tour, I'm doing lots and lots of Zoom calls, and it's with bookstores and libraries. So there's actually a really wide reach that you can attain, more than if you went physically there and met 100 people. We're doing Zoom calls with 200 to 50 people from around the country. So it's been really interesting.
It is exciting. And tell me about how you're feeling personally in these days of COVID, staying home, trying to do something a little bit different than you're used to professionally. Has this been an exciting time for you to sort of look inward and be relaxing a bit more in your quiet place? Or are you just so upset that you're not out there in your thriving New York City that you love so much?
I think a lot of writers would say that they're introverts, and so my natural state is to be in my office writing. But it's been really wonderful being up here in the country and being able to have a vegetable garden, and I set up a bluebird nest, and it's doing those small things that make you feel connected with nature and that the world will be okay. That has really gotten me through. And what I do is I sit in a room and write all day, so that hasn't changed.
I'm sure all of the genius is just flowing these days with the opportunity around you.
Fingers crossed.
And tell me about the Lions of Fifth Avenue. It is such a beautiful, iconic image to think of those lions on Fifth Avenue. And generations have walked by and gotten inspiration there. Tell me about how the building became such a critical character in your book. It's almost like a living, breathing protagonist.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was hoping to achieve. So the building is just fascinating about its construction and, what it means to the city of New York. I ended up writing about the library because at author talks, everyone brought it up as, if you're going to pick a landmark in New York, how about the library? And I thought, that could be interesting. And I started doing some research, and I learned that when it was built, they included a 7-room apartment in the library for the superintendent and his family to live in. And once I realized that a family actually lived in the library, I thought, this is perfect, and took the idea and ran with it.
That's got to be some of the best real estate on the island.
Yes. Well, right now it's offices and storage, unfortunately. It was the superintendent's apartment for about 30 years. And he lived there with his wife and 3 kids. His daughter was born in the library. Wow. So we're talking starting in 1911. And the kids used to play baseball in the reading room using books as bases until they got caught and got in trouble.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really the beautiful part of some of the research that goes into these projects. I know that in each of your works, the history of a place has really been revealed to an audience that never knew so much about it. How do you feel about being the one to introduce even New Yorkers to another part of New York?
I love it. All my books are set in landmark buildings. And so they really do become a kind of character in the book. And I love all these layers of stories that are in these buildings over the years. So what was it like in the 1880s? And then what was it like in the 1980s? And just comparing and contrasting how especially women who lived in the buildings existed and what kind of power did they have? What was their life like? And so that's the fun thing, is just finding all the ghosts that wander the hallways and trying to bring them to life.
And tell me about the women characters. There are still struggles today for women's equality and for a place outside of the home. But that obviously is a generational fight that's been happening forever. And it seems as though women have always found a way to leave their mark, to use their voice. Tell me about the stories that you've revealed of women sort of taking that larger position, that leadership role.
Yeah, sure. So my main character is a woman named Laura Lyons, and she's invented, but she's really a compilation of a lot of women who, that part of the book is set in 1913. And she lives in the library with her husband and 2 kids, and she's surrounded by all this knowledge, but she feels stifled. You know, she wants to do something out in the greater world. So she applies to Columbia Journalism School, which was co-ed at that time and in its 2nd year. And suddenly is, wandering around the city looking for stories and learning about what was called the New Woman, which was kind of the Greenwich Village woman who was out speaking her mind and talking about the right to vote and birth control. And it opens up her world. And so it's interesting to see that has happened over time, and we go through cycles, and hopefully we're getting more traction and more power as time goes on.
I was really interested in the character of the librarian. When I think of a librarian, it's sort of central casting, the older woman with the glasses on, teaching me the Dewey Decimal System. But there's such a respect that comes out of that job as a librarian. Tell me about what we don't know about these incredible figures.
That's such a great question. So my librarian in the book in 1993, in that timeline, is named Sadie, and she's a curator for the Berg collection, and that actually exists in the library. It's like a smaller collection within it. And it's 400 authors, manuscripts, letters, books, diaries, and they're all saved, and they're very carefully preserved, so that you can go back and see these generations of authors and how Walt Whitman created a poem, what he scratched out, the tears, did that signify frustration, the words that were changed, the coffee stains on this document that he wouldn't know would be worth tens of thousands of dollars one day. And so for me, the important thing about librarians and libraries is that they're safekeeping these artifacts of the past. And then they're revisited as times change and thinking evolves. And so it was really fun to bring that to light of what the real mission of something like the Berg collection is.
Something interesting in your books is that the characters are often an amalgam of something real and something made up. Tell me about how you pick the pieces of the interviews you do and the stories in your mind to sort of blend them together and form a character.
Yeah, sure. So in The Lions of Fifth Avenue, the character of Sadie, who's the curator, she's her own person, because they do develop as you start to write. But I interviewed an amazing librarian named Jean Ashton, who was in charge of a library that had some amazing, frightening thefts going on in the 1990s that I modeled the book theft in my book about. And she was incredible at giving me really great details about what it was like to go through being in a library and being in charge when $1.8 million of items had been stolen over the course of 3 months. And so I could really get a really first-person account of what that felt like. And then also in the book, there's a character who is a doctor who works in kind of the public down in the tenements in the 1910s, and that's based on a real woman named S. Josephine Baker, who was a pioneer in the field of public health and really saved so many lives. So again, that was looking at her biography and just being so inspired, and then creating a character who fit into my plot to work with.
Tell me about interweaving characters from different times seamlessly, chapter by chapter, bouncing back and forth between these two worlds, yet creating one story. Why is that such a special formula for you?
I've always loved reading books like that, and so I was drawn to it when I started to write. And so in this timeline, you have Laura in 1913, you have Sadie in 1993, and the story goes back and forth in time with kind of a mystery that propels the story forward, because I love a good page turner. And it's tricky because you're comparing and contrasting different times, and you want to make sure you have the details right in each period. And as I go back and forth and figure out the plot, there are days that my mind is just spinning and I have to go and eat a lot of cheese, because that always helps. So it's tough, but once I've figured that plot out and kind of woven them together, that's when the story really sings, because these women start to come alive and come off the page and really become emblems of their time.
So walk me through the idea of secrets coming forward. What is it that you do in your research that really brings things to light for you? I know that it's not a simple process to go back and say, what was this time really like? From what they ate to what they wore to what they said. What is that process for you that really brings all of the details to life?
Yeah, it's a lot of interviewing people who are experts in whatever subject I'm looking into, whatever time period, reading a lot of biographies from that time period. And so I can understand of what it was like to live then. And then pulling up almost like a vacuum cleaner, sucking up the details, the really small ones, like what they were eating, what was on the menu of the restaurant, what did they wear, how would that have felt to wear that? And then hopefully the characters inhabit their roles.
And tell me about this idea that you have more books in the works because you're playing on this formula that so beautifully uses your voice to tell a story. You have more coming up. Give us a little taste of this process.
Yeah, sure. So each book is set in a landmark building, either the Dakota, Grand Central Terminal, the Chelsea Hotel, and now the Lions of Fifth Avenue and the Library. And it's just so much fun because I really find the building and then create this framework around it. And using live interviews from people who live there or who work there. And it's just so much fun. And every time I finish a book, I look around and I think, okay, what building's next? And there's so many in New York and it's constantly changing. And so it's just the perfect place to set a book in a building.
I love that the Lions are a landmark like any other where people pose, whether they live in New York and they're passing by, they might take a picture, or tourists will stop by. And recently we've seen these memes with the Lions wearing masks.
Yes.
How very chic of them to be part of this era that we're in.
They're wonderful. The library posted some photos and they got so much traction. And apparently the masks are, I think, 4 feet wide. Or something, and they're just wonderful.
That's a big smile.
It's great, and I think it sends such a great message to New York, which has survived so much and is doing well right now, and to just keep up the fight, and that we'll all get through this together.
We absolutely will. Fiona, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.